What's up, guys, and welcome to the First Take podcast, where every now and then some of our staff and friends will get together and talk about some things going on in our world. In this episode, we answer the question, why are Christians so intolerant? If you enjoy this podcast, bop that like button. If you really enjoy this podcast, share it with your friends. Whether you're listening or watching, you'll be glad you tuned in. Here is episode 5.
All right. Bryan, we got requests that they wanted to see their pastor dance to this music.
I don't... That's about as all I can do.
Come on, buddy.
Huh?
Hey, welcome to the First Take podcast. We are so glad to be back with you wherever you are watching or listening. I am joined by my guy, Seth Cooley.
That's right.
And P-Paul and Gramps are with us again, so say hello, guys.
I refuse to say hello to that.
Yeah, I mean, we've got the techno calliope music going in the background.
Bryan and Beau are also here with us. They are here to bring some wisdom to this podcast, hopefully. But we're excited to be here. It's going to be a great day, and I can't wait for it. This past weekend, Bryan has given us a message about intolerance. But before we get to that, I want to talk about, we are not a sponsored podcast.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
But we did get an amazing shout out from Westlake Wings.
We did. That's amazing because that place is amazing.
They are amazing. And
they are the wings of Southwest Louisiana.
They said it themselves. They put it in their post. And so we just want to say thank you for that.
I think it was actually a quote of me.
Yeah, I think you said it.
It was,
and so these wings are the wings of Southwest Louisiana.
Yeah, there you go.
I think I should get free wings for life.
That would be an amazing trade-off. We would be getting way more than they are.
Very much so.
Of being mentioned on this podcast. But hey, we're going to start, just every week we're going to have an unpaid sponsor of that week's episode. And so this week, the unpaid sponsor is Hotworx in Moss Bluff.
There you go.
And so shout out to Jill. A couple of us are members of Hotworx.
Yes.
It may not show that. It may not look like it, but we are members.
The two that look the most out of shape. We are members of Hotworx.
A couple of us are afraid, I would say, to be members. I'm just going to go ahead and throw that out there.
Why are you looking at me?
Oh, I just think you're afraid.
I'm a member of Excel Physical Therapy right now. And so that's how
Gramps,
I'm getting
tell
it.
us your story of physical therapy. How's that going for you?
Well, not well, but also well at the same time. And so
here's the deal about Seth. I don't know if you know this about Seth. Anything a lot of other people are doing, Seth is out on.
Oh, yeah.
So
I
all
can
of
see
us
that.
were joining
Yes.
Hotworx. So he decided, I'm good.
Forget it. Nope, not happening.
I'm doing something else. And so he goes to South Beau Elite. Is that what it's called?
No.
South Beau Fit?
Yeah.
Okay, shout out to them too. But you go there at like 11:30 at night when no one's there.
That is true.
Yeah. And so
And the first statement's partially true.
shout out to Hotworx. Shout out to Jill. Hey, we also want to bring up Janet.
Oh, the mythological
Janet. All right, so we just want to tell everybody.
If you happen to be listening to this and
Please.
you're real, please let us know who you are.
We want to know
because
who you are.
If she's real, she is killing it.
And I'm going to tell you right now,
killing it.
Amber, my wife, is obsessed with knowing who Janet is.
What's the deal?
So there's this leaderboard at Hotworx.
Yes.
That as you burn calories, like it goes to the app. And there's a local leaderboard, and so we're all competing. I was killing everybody for a while. I hadn't been doing so hot here lately, so Bryan kind of took the lead.
Destroying you now.
Yeah, and so
Is this like community wide?
just Moss Bluff.
Okay.
Yeah, just that one location.
Okay.
And there's this lady named Janet. She's. Am
I
I
don't
exaggerating
know.
to say she's 100,000 ahead of everybody else?
I don't know if she's 100,000 ahead. She's over 100,000.
Look it up, producer Butterworth.
But
We need to know.
she is like it's to the point of like I don't know if she's real or if somebody's just at home saying, "Yeah, I'm doing Hotworx."
Yeah, they
while I'm
click
sitting in my-"
100,000 what? Like visits?
Calories
No, you
burned.
calories burned is like a point.
104,797, and the next person is at 79,000.
So she's at 105,000. The next person is
What's
at about
tracking
80,000. Apple Watches or smart
She's
watches.
over here.
Yeah, she's just doing whatever, I think. But hey, we want to know who Janet is. So if nothing else comes out of this podcast,
Yeah.
if Amber Louvier can figure out who Janet is and meet this person, I think that would be a win here.
Yeah. There's so many people who are listening right now who don't do Hotworx and they're like, "What are they talking about?"
It's okay. Yeah. Hey, check Hotworx out. Tell Jill that we sent you there. We have our own little Moss Bluff club, First Moss Bluff club at Hotworx, and so
That's right.
tell her we sent you. It's going to be great. But like I said, this past weekend, Bryan, you got into the subject of intolerant Christians, and we had a few questions that came out of that. And so if you could just give us a synopsis of what you talked about, kind of an overview, maybe a couple of main ideas that you talked about.
Yeah. So in Intolerant Christian, it's, tune into this podcast every week and you see how we treat John. That's good.
Exactly. There's a lot of intolerance there.
Absolutely.
Should be
Deservedly so.
Yeah,
but anyway, we love John. But the main idea of the message is we have a standard. It goes all the way back to the first message where we talked about that the Bible is our anchor. It's our standard. It's perfect in what it says and what it is. And with that, God has drawn boundaries for us in life, and we don't have the permission or the ability to erase them, move them, or ignore them as Christ followers. And so we live in a culture where because you draw a boundary, you're going to get labeled intolerant. It's just going to happen. And so the question then becomes well, then how do we live in that world? How do we live in that world where we can mix truth and grace together? Because we're going to stand for truth. We have to. Jesus did. And so we're going to have to as well, but do it in a gracious and grace-filled, winsome way. And he did that as well. So you see, he never compromised, but he was also gracious. People who didn't even agree with him still loved him.
Yeah.
So we got to figure out how to do that in this culture today. And that's really kind of what the message was about.
Yeah. And so I think a good place for us to start is that, intolerance, or as someone would call intolerance, can take on a couple of different forms, right? It can be bad and it can be hateful, like you just said.
Yeah.
But it can also be loving and actually a good thing. And so I want to start with Beau, really quickly, just kind of give us a rundown of when you've seen intolerance take on that bad form where it may become hateful, or it may become in a way that isn't a way that Christ followers should be intolerant, if we're going to use that word as kind of our jumping off point.
When I thought about having to answer questions today, I just thought it would be easier for me to talk about how other people have done this. And so I'm not going to take the easy way out.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about in a way where I have been intolerant.
Mm-hmm.
And so there have been various struggles we've all gone through struggles where we've had the crisis of belief or whatever. So a time of intolerance for me is whenever I was experiencing people being intolerant of me, people being very judgmental in a difficult season of life. And I had to choose if I was going to check out or if I was just going to press in to be more known, to be more part of a community. But intolerance versus intolerance is like a dynamite.
Yeah.
And so
that's looking for an explosion.
For real.
Well, that's war. That's war.
That is war at that point.
Exactly.
And so, and that may be the easiest level for me to answer, but quite honestly, when we face intolerance ourselves, it builds something in us. Whether it's an aggravation or a depression or whatever. And so intolerance against the intolerance really is destructive.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very much.
And I mean, there are other times where it can go too far, where like our intolerance can turn to where we're not really talking about what someone is doing, but we start attacking characters. We start attacking like who someone is. Tell some times where you've seen it go in a different way, in a bad way, in a way that maybe could not be, said, hey, I'm being loving in this moment. I'm actually, where you've seen it go an opposite direction.
Well, I think it happens on social media a lot. We turn people into characters on social media. I see it happen to prominent pastors that, they'll take a statement out of context and that'll get turned into, that characterization of that person and a straw man that's easy to attack and burn down and that kind of thing when it really doesn't represent anything about who that person is. Yeah.
Right. And so, but it's not always bad to have some intolerant feelings. You said this in your message on Sunday, there's an intolerance that says, hey, this is the truth and I love you enough to tell it to you. Mm-hmm. And so Seth, I want to come to you. When have you seen this type of intolerance actually be a good thing that if people understood and we would handle it correctly, it actually is a good thing and a loving thing to do for somebody?
I'd say I've seen it in my own personal life with family members and friends and, even you like saying, hey, I see this in you. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily lining up with what I really know you want to be,
right?
Or what scripture says for your life. And so because I love you, I think that you should head in a different direction. And so by someone else kind of not tolerating my own personal shortcomings, like that's helped me to grow. But it was done like in a grace-filled way. And there wasn't a level of compromise there when I was compromising, possibly.
Yeah, I know for me, like when I'm dealing with, someone who isn't a Christ follower, someone who doesn't believe what I believe, I've been, it's a long time since I wasn't a Christian, but it hasn't been that long since I wasn't walking with the Lord. Mm-hmm. And so I can go back to those times in my life and just remember how miserable I was, even though I thought I was happy, even though I had some of the things that this world would say would make me happy, but I can remember just how miserable I was underneath everything. Mm-hmm. And so when I try to visit with people and tell them and talk to them about their lives, it's not from a position of, hey, here's what you shouldn't do, and all that kind of stuff that I know a lot of people maybe have some hurt and pain from people doing that to them. Mine is more of calling someone to the more that I've experienced in Jesus.
Yeah,
right.
That's good.
Yeah, and so I know for me, when I'm having these conversations, I like to center more on, hey, here's what Jesus has done for me. Here's the freedom and hope that he's given my life. And I'd like to invite you into that. And so that might still be labeled as intolerant because I think Jesus is the only way. And I don't want to talk about any other way.
Right. That's
because
right.
I do. So some might still see that as intolerant, but that intolerance is based in like actual love and a hopefulness for someone else.
Well, I mean, if we're being honest, Bryan talked about grace and truth. And before we can show grace and truth to those around us, like we have to experience both of those things in our own personal life with our own personal walk with Jesus. Mm-hmm. And so like, I'm going to stay true to what Jesus taught because I've experienced his grace and because it's changed my life. And so when other people are intolerant to me or when other people challenge my beliefs or ask questions, or maybe it's an opportunity for me to challenge them, to call them to more, like I'm going to be grace-filled and I'm going to strive to be grace-filled and truth-filled because of what I've personally experienced with Jesus. I think that if you don't have that, you're not going to be able to do those other two things with other people.
Yeah, I totally get that. And so, we've brought up the idea of truth quite a few times already in the first 10 minutes of this podcast. And I think that that's an important place for us to sit a little bit, because what we're really talking about whenever we get these questions from people or these accusations from people, because all of us have faced it, it's not really about intolerance. It's about truth and people's reaction to truth, our own reaction to truth, their reaction to truth, and that sort of thing. And it sort of reminds me of the movie A Few Good Men. What's the quote I'm thinking of?
You can't handle the truth.
You can't handle
it. Exactly.
I was lost.
Completely lost. Yeah. So
that movie came out. This guy was a little, I don't even know if you were born
dude,
yet.
it's a great movie though. You need to watch this movie, but you can't handle the truth, right? And culturally, I really do think we have a couple of problems with truth. And so we're going to talk about a couple of those problems when we think about truth, because that is what the root of this intolerance label really comes to. And the first problem is the problem of relativism, right? And that the idea that truth is in the eye of the beholder. And I actually saw some statistics on relativism in our culture. It's pretty pervasive. And the Barna research shows that 75% of American adults actually agree that truth is in the eye of the beholder. 75% of American adults. 83% of teenagers believe that moral truth depends on a person's circumstances, where they find themselves in that moment. So, Bryan, I'm going to come to you for a response to that. And the question that actually came into us was, isn't it true that truth is always relative to the person and their situation?
Well, quick answer is no.
Yeah, so
it is not always
true. Let's expound on that a little bit.
Because just saying that's a self-refuting even question. If it's always true, then even what you just said right there, well, that's true for you, but it's still not true for me. So it's still not, it can't even always be true. So no, there has to be something, there is something outside of us. Anytime you've made the statement, or anybody's made a statement of you should, you ought, or you've thought it, you felt it, what you're doing is you're saying that there's something above us, something above me, something above this situation that you should conform to. Mm-hmm. And the simple fact of saying, well, if it's true for you, then it's true for you. If it's true for me, it's true for me. Then I can never say you ought to do anything again. Right. You could look at me and say, I'm about to kill Seth right here, right now. And I can't say you should not do that.
Right.
I'd be like, all right, dude.
Well, that's your truth.
If that's what you want to do.
Yeah. Poor Seth.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
You can't call anything wrong. You can't call, everything is just, it is what it is. You can't call anything wrong. You can't look at any horrible atrocity, say even the Holocaust. It's like, well, that was what was true for them, so it is what it is.
Yeah.
So you have to come down to some sort of, there is a standard and there's going to be one. And even people who try to skate it and skirt it for their own convenience,
Sure,
because they don't want to handle the truth, you're still going to come back around to it.
Well, let's go a little bit further into that, because I think it is out of convenience that our culture has such a problem with absolute truth.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are some things that y'all think we are so against actually taking we're all taking a stance on a lot of different things, but we don't want to, talk about right and wrong. We want to kind of just let everybody believe what they believe. And I'm talking culturally, obviously. I'm talking about as a whole. I'm really generalizing a lot of people. I know not everybody is like this, but why? What is the draw to that? Why would we want to do that?
I'll just say because it feels more loving a lot of times. And that's why I said in the message, because I've heard William Lane Craig say it before, is you can't do it though. You cannot call sin. You can't get away with letting sin go and not calling it sin just because it feels more loving to do so.
Yeah.
You just can't do that.
Yeah. It's a big point.
Yeah, I think I would completely agree with that. We're subject to making ourselves feel a certain way and trying to not make someone else feel a certain way.
Sure.
But I think we're all trapped by our own convenience and comfort of our own opinions, and we displace truth with our opinions. And so instead of allowing truth to inform our opinions, we flip that paradigm. And that's why we get so messed up. That's why there's probably more confusion and more arguments. And I think that's a big giant root of what is truth? I mean, your truth, my truth. No, I mean, there is a ultimate standard of truth. And even whenever someone says, well, that's your truth, well, what they're saying is, well, I'm the standard of my truth. You're the standard of your truth. Yeah. Well, that would be wrong, but we do agree that there's a standard of truth.
Yeah.
We as Christians, as I'll use the word Orthodox Christians that are Bible-centered, we believe that God's word is the ultimate truth, and it does inform our opinions, and an opinion is not going to necessarily shape our life. Truth will.
Yeah.
And so the world doesn't need another believer's opinion. I believe the world needs what God has said is truth.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And what the world really needs in addition to that, which would begin, I think, to dismiss some of these arguments, is the world needs to see us live up and live out God's truth.
That's right. I think that probably is the bigger issue here, right? Is that we claim this truth, but we don't actually live it.
Yeah, well, that gets into the hypocrisy message.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that's true. I mean, I even said it Sunday, I'm a hypocrite. That doesn't change what Jesus said.
Exactly.
Just because I can't live up to it doesn't change what he actually said.
It isn't, my inability to live up to that truth isn't a reason for you to deny that truth exists.
Right.
Is a good way for me to think about it. But I get why that would be enticing to someone who's already trying not to believe it, is to look at others and be like, man, those people, they talk a good game, but that's not who they really are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say that it's even like the measurement, the lopsided measurement turns people off. And so like for the outsider to get judged by something that seems so trivial, but a sin that may be going inside the church that by the world's eyes or by humans' eyes is way worse than what the outsider might get judged for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so when that happens, from the outside looking in, the non-church member or the non-Christian looking at that, if they're viewing that scale, and that's a huge turnoff.
What happens is people end up pulling the ripcord. They're like, all right, this doesn't make sense to me, so I'm out.
Yeah.
I mean, look, this was mentioned in our small group discussion. Like, look at our laws as a country. In some states, it's more illegal to smoke pot than it is to kill a baby.
Right.
And so juggling that in your mind, it just doesn't make sense. And so I think when people struggle with that, they throw their hands up in the air and say, well, everything's fair game if that's going to be the case.
Right. And so the other problem with truth that I wanted us to kind of talk about goes along with what we've sort of gone into a little bit, and that's the polarization of our society. The feeling that even friends don't agree on stuff anymore. It's like we're so polarized. And I read something that said our education is now about skepticism more than learning. And I think that builds that sort of nature in us. And so it's not just the polarization of our society, it's also polarization laced with defensiveness. And see, the idea of, if I don't believe something, I can't figure something out, if I can't make something make sense, I'm just going to retreat to my corner and I'm done with the conversation. I don't want to hear what you have to say. I don't want to do that. And so I'd like to hear you guys or, kind of insight on how we can avoid doing that, because I think that happens even, if we're talking to the church or we're talking to the community at large, it happens everywhere. It even happens in our churches where if I disagree about something, some people will fight, but a lot of people will just retreat. They'll be like, "No, I don't believe that. I'm going to leave, go to a different place," or, all these different things happen. So how do we avoid that trap of the culture that says, I'm going to be polarized and I'm also going to be defensive and I'm going to turn myself off to listening to any other perspectives or anything else that's going on out there?
You want that one?
Bryan, you got it.
Okay. So I'm going to have to just defer to one of our values, or our next steps, which is that you have to live like Jesus. Because there were people, like I said already, who didn't agree with him, but yet they were drawn to him. That's the key, is even when they would disagree with his statements, they were still drawn to his life. And I think that's what we have to do, is we've got to be a light in the world, endear ourselves to our community, endear ourselves to our neighbors, to where they will say something. It goes into the story of Benjamin Franklin, who was not a believer in Jesus, but he loved George Whitefield, and he gave money to him. Whitefield was a preacher, really charismatic person. He gave money to Whitefield, and they asked Franklin, like, "Why did you give him money? You don't believe what he believes." And Franklin said, "Yeah, that's true, but I know he believes it."
Huh.
That's
his authenticity.
Who he was as a person, attracted Franklin. Even though Franklin never did come to know Jesus, he was still friends with Whitefield and willing to not only be friends with him, but support him financially. And I think we're missing that at times today. We're such in a hurry to like, we're going to turn tables over and we're going to get it going back in the right direction. And it's, a lot of that. We talked about this yesterday. I'll let you elaborate, Beau, is in fear. When it's really, we take one instance that Jesus did that, and keep in mind, he did that in what would have been the church.
Yeah.
So let's keep context right here as well.
He wasn't doing that in the culture, in the community.
No, he didn't go to the local high school and turn tables over and say, "Y'all better straighten up or else."
Right.
He did that to the religious people. Mm-hmm. So that's something to keep in mind as well. But ultimately what it comes down to is, can you live like Jesus lived? Yeah. So you can do what Jesus did, which is people who don't agree with you will still be attracted to your life because there's just something there.
Yes.
Well, that's where the grace comes into play, and grace and just to add that humility.
Yeah.
And like, if you don't get those two things on how Jesus lived, like Jesus lived those out as well as the truth, like you're missing the most fundamental aspect of the gospel.
Yes.
In my opinion.
Yeah. And go ahead.
In my to be released book, but this is different. I mean, for real, I'm serious. I mean, that's we default to that. Yeah, but this is different. There's a story on every page where we go, but this is different. So if I was going to write a story about this topic right now, I would say that, and golly, all you got to do is just read the New Testament and see the society was incredibly corrupt. I mean, there were people, the greatest wonders of the world. One of them was a temple where, prostitution was part of worship.
Yeah.
And in a society where, Christians were being told, if you don't just say Jesus, Caesar is Lord, you're dead. You're out of here. No career for you. And so to hear us say, but this is different. This is, Jesus was alive back then, or Paul was alive back then. They were alive in a crazy time.
Yeah.
And so when Jesus was trying to help the disciples navigate, here's how they're going to know that you're mine. He says, by the love you have for one another.
Yes.
It's not going to be by miraculous things that are just happening every moment. It's going to be the love that you have for one another. And man, I'm trying to get better at that.
Yeah.
At loving people that I'm not only that I disagree with, but that are disagreeable.
Yeah.
That maybe have some aggression in it. And so,
that's why we keep John here, because he helps us grow in that.
It's a training
shows
field.
a picture of that.
There's no doubt.
Well, no, I think that is the main idea. The big point that we want to make sure we all understand is that if there are two ways of showing intolerance, we want to err on the side of how Jesus did it. And he did it through his love. He did it through real truth, that he spoke directly to people, and he was not blunt to be rude. We always hear of people saying, well, I'm just blunt, that sort of thing. No. He wasn't rude. He did it in a way, and he did it always out of love and out of hope for them, out of wanting more for them. That's where he was always coming from. So any time that we're trying to tell someone the truth in our lives, it needs to start with a relationship that is built on love and a hope for that person, not on this theological truth and game that we want to beat them into submission with the truth that we intellectually have, right? So what's cool about us four is that we all kind of come from four different backgrounds. And, a couple of us were raised in church and a couple of us weren't raised in church. A couple of us never really hit, too bad of the skids of life. And a couple of us have gone down some roads that we're not really 100% proud of. But I bet we can all relate to how I want us to end our discussion today. Because as I'm sure each of us, as we have chosen to follow Jesus with our lives, there have been people in our lives who just didn't understand what we were doing, and they couldn't get behind it, and they've had some issues with it. They maybe couldn't get rid of the old picture of us and see the new picture of us, or they just couldn't figure out why we would choose to live our lives differently. And this could be friends, this could be family, this could be anybody. And they may have called us intolerant or fake or anything like that, right? That a lot of people get labeled. And I just want to know, to encourage everybody, how have you dealt with those types of reactions from the people in your lives? How have you kind of stepped back and gained some perspective? And I know that we can deal negatively or positively, but maybe we'll give some stories of both, of how you've dealt with those types of reactions from the people in your life. I'll start while you think.
All right.
Yep.
This is a big one for me because I have had a roller coaster of a faith journey. I haven't always been faithful. I've been, there was a point in my high school days where I was not walking with the Lord. I was not living for Jesus in any way, shape, or form. And you would not have known that I was saved at a young age had you seen my life at that point. And then there was another point in my life in my 20s where it was the same deal. And so in the middle of all that, I've professed that I was a follower, and I did, and there was, fruit in my life. But in those and so because of that, it's hard for people to believe that John Louvier works at a church now. Some people that know me still today really well, it's still hard for them to believe, but especially the people that knew me back then. And so what I've tried to do is just be real patient with people. It does hurt sometimes, like especially, if they throw around words like fake or, anything like that, that it's not real. That does hurt. That can get to your feelings pretty quick. But what I've tried to do is say, I've earned all that. I earned that for a long time, and because of that, I just try to be patient with people and just show them with my life. And so, what do you guys do to respond?
So for me, it was mostly in high school, around friends, around people that I like to be around, my teammates, classmates, and it was always like, Seth, why are you this way? Like, do you think you're better than us? Like, you're a goody two shoes. Like, why are you not going to this party? Why are you not doing this and that? And there was times where I did conform and do those things. And I would say just like, if you're one of those people that is in that position where you have the option to look at truth and say, man, I just want to do what everybody else is doing because it just seems so much easier.
Yeah.
Don't, because I've done both. And, I've been a part of church and being a Christian from a very young age. And so that just changed and changed and changed as I grew up, and went through the different phases of life. But man, like just the struggle of conformity. And so like that's where my attack, I guess, was coming from, and more along the lines of like, Seth, you just think you're better than everybody else because you're a good Baptist kid, or you're a Christian, or you lead worship or whatever.
Yeah.
And then when there was failure from me,
they really like to point that out.
Oh man, it was, Seth's just like us now.
Yeah.
And I don't know, looking back, I'm so proud of the times in which I didn't conform.
Yeah.
And obviously I have regret for the times in which I did. But if you're in that position, like hold true to what you profess, because it will be worth it.
Yeah.
Well, it just in that, Seth, I mean, there's a terrible misunderstanding of what Christianity is too, right there in that of like, oh, you think you're better than us? Like, no, actually the opposite is true.
I know I'm
like,
the worst.
I know that I am the chief of sinners, to quote Paul.
Yeah.
Like I identify with Paul when he said that I am the chief of sinners, the least deserving of anything and everything.
Yeah. The struggle was for me though, is like, not to, brag or whatever, but like my parents were really strict, and like at one point in time, I was the goody two shoes, and so like it's a little bit different than like your
It was
story.
forced upon you, but you were it.
And so like for those of you that like maybe you haven't strayed or done just these terrible things, like that's okay. Like stick to that.
Yeah, stick to that testimony.
Yeah,
it's a good one to have.
You know what does that make
Well,
sense?
yeah, it does. I mean, because that's I mean, it's my father-in-law's story, which and I have a high respect for him too. So I mean, I understand that, but still at the same time,
The
it's
expectations are what's off.
That and just the understanding of what it takes to be a Christian. What it takes to be a Christian is the admission, the humility to the admission that I'm completely 100% flawed, even in what looks to be a perfect goody two shoes. No, I'm 100% flawed, and the only hope I have is the cross of Jesus. That's what it takes to be a Christian.
I would probably say that's what caused so much tension in Seth growing up, is like he probably knew, wait, no, I'm nowhere near what people think I am. And so it creates this tension in your life
because there was failures that I knew about that other people didn't know about. And so, you're just a goody two shoes, and it's like,
I love it.
Actually, I want to tell you that I'm not. And so like even if you have that opportunity to be like, actually, man, I'm not,
to be real with people.
Yeah, I regret not being more real with people at times.
That's a good point too. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think whenever you're going through adolescence and stuff in teenage years, you're so shaky at that point where, are they going to reject me if I even come clean on any of those things?
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
It's already stressful. I had a family member that would poke me in the chest and go, "What are you, super Christian, young Billy Graham?" Because I got saved, early teens, started preaching in my early teens. And that would, from the outside, would make you look like, hey, this guy's got it together. But I was, I was learning more and more about who God was and who he was calling me to be. But I was also learning how far off I was from both of those things. And so I would say I want to answer it in two ways. The first way is what Bryan said, is you got to know that the admission that we're broken without him is the portal that gets us into a relationship with him.
Yeah.
I mean, we gotta believe first that we're sinners before we will ever understand that we have a need for a Savior.
That's right.
And so while I don't celebrate the fact that I struggle with sin, I celebrate the fact that he loves me even though I do. And so that gives me confidence. And I learned that confidence really early in my Christian walk because I had a pastor who loved me, told me the truth, who discipled me, mentored me. And that was one of the things he just drilled into my head. The other thing is you got to own your brokenness to those that you trust. You don't have to own it to everybody.
That's right.
To those that you trust is the starting point for that. So not everybody's called to get on a podcast and talk about it.
Yeah.
Or to get on a stage and talk about it. But with your closest and trusted friends, you can work through how great God is to love you through and in your brokenness. And that creates an identity in us that we can face these things.
Yeah, we can bring light to the darkness.
So it's more of a crisis of identity than it is anything else. And so, man, I'm so grateful for God's grace in my life and in y'all's lives because it speaks to me. I mean, even though as messed up as we've talked about how John is, you know, just to know people who are honest is a blessing.
Yeah. So Bryan, how have you dealt with, some of that rejection maybe? You're you kind of are a get over it type of guy, but maybe early on in your walk, did it affect you more? And, how'd you deal with it back then?
I'm going to be completely transparent here. I didn't have that much because where I grew up and went to high school, I moved away from there at 19 years old. And just about a few months, maybe 6 to 8 months, I can't remember the exact time frame, after moving away from that is when God saved me. So all the people that I was around at that point did not know who I was in high school. Now, if they had, I probably would have dealt with those things. But I'll just be honest, I didn't ever have, trying to recollect, I didn't have that experience.
That's actually good, though, because that's 4 different experiences from all 4 of us. Because I do have those friends who I ran with, who I was on Lake Dotree with every weekend, right? And so, like, I have those friends, and it took them a while, and now they're starting to see, and like I'm able to have some really good conversations with them now, and that's a good thing. But I'll just to encourage the people that maybe have my story, consistency over time is what changes people's minds. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be anything I say. It's not going to be anything really I do. It's just going to, or in a moment. It's going to be consistency over time and just walking with the Lord. And it's not perfection because, I mean, hang out with me for a day. You'll see that it can't be that, right? And so it's just going to be loving people enough to tell them the truth in a way that they can hear it. And that's what gets us from an intolerance that isn't acceptable to other people to an intolerance that maybe they will actually listen to one day when we're talking about the truth of what has changed our lives. So, guys, this has been a great discussion. I'm so glad that we were able to get together. Thank you for joining the First Take podcast. All of you, thank you for listening or watching wherever you are. If you like this type of content, you want more of it, make sure that you subscribe to the First Moss Bluff podcast, wherever you get your podcast. Share it with your friends if you think that they could enjoy this. Bryan, let's get some of that
Brian's
going, baby.
dancing.
Got to get that vibe.
Come on, Gail, you got to get a shot of Bryan.
Get a shot. Close up. Love it. Hey, we love you. We'll see you next time.
Don't be an Eagles fan.